is dead. The boys all take a minute to cry. They then go off on various errands. Eventually, one of them remembers that they knew an expert in angels named Lily Sunder, and everyone's shocked as nobody expected continuity to be relevant. So they bring in the older red-headed lady who was previously an enemy, and doesn't that sound familiar? Anyway, she comes up with a plan where they can bring Jack back to life as soon as Castiel goes and gets his soul out of heaven. Unfortunately, while the two of them are chilling in heaven, an ancient, evil, black liquid thing that is able to overwhelm angels starts invading and causing problems. Why does that sound familiar? Anyway, success. Jack is back on his feet, and there is much rejoicing.
Let it be.
My life is complete. Everything is alright. Life is good to me. I'm in paradise.
Welcome to Byzantium, aka we're really very sorry about Taxi Driver. Can you please forgive us and stop bringing it up? Okay, so earlier this year, Alice Jester and I teamed up and did a worst episodes of Supernatural rankings on the Winchester Family Business. And I rated the Season 8 episode Taxi Driver as my pick. On reflection, this episode had a lot of commonalities with that. Consider these features. The brothers are trying to rescue a family member from an afterlife. The brothers are trying to get someone into heaven. A previously unmentioned being related to death appears for the first time. Naomi shows up at the end and helps Team Free Will out. And hallways are prominent features of both afterlives Team Free Will visits. But this episode went and outright contradicted what Taxi Driver said. In that episode, a Reaper tells us, depends on who you know, what palms get greased. If you're on the King of Hell's no-fly list, no way you cruise the friendly skies. But in this episode, we find out that the Reapers are just the taxi drivers. Anubis is the one who picks the destination, and he says nobody can bribe him. There's no negotiation. There's no deals to be made. So there's no way Crowley, even as the King of Hell, could have gotten Bobby's soul as we were shown and told in that episode. Now, some of you may ask, Nate, Season 8 came earlier, so why aren't you upset that this episode contradicted the previously established canon? Thank you for the question and the views, audience member, and may I say that you are looking especially lovely today. See, the difference here is that the earlier canon didn't make any sense logically or internally with the show. If in the supernatural world it is possible for the destination of souls to be influenced at all, regardless of by who or what method, then key plot points and conflicts in the previous Season 5 and Season 6 just fall apart and make no sense. By this episode contradicting the earlier episode of Taxi Driver, it ends that conflict with the episodes that came even earlier. See? So I'm more than happy to embrace this episode's new canon since it allows better seasons to fit smoothly with what came later. If any of you showmakers are watching or reading me, then let me issue my sincere and deep gratitude and personal thanks for fixing the mess. What else is there to say about this episode? I like that Naomi, you'll be Naomi. I like that her new characterization has kind of remained constant across multiple episodes. Amanda Tapping is a fine actress. I love me some Stargate, and I think she can do very well in a role as an ally of the Winchesters, but not necessarily a friend, which is something I think Crowley was supposed to be, but Mark Sheppard wasn't always given the best material to work with. Speaking of decent acting all around from everyone, let me point out another feature I really liked in this episode. There are two small moments. The first is when we see Jack's moment in heaven, and it's just eating burgers with the boys. The second is when Dean finds Sam in the woods and screams, "Did you make a deal?" What's so great moments? Fiction writing has a lot in common with magic trick and performances. The magician and the writer are both showing the audience something which everyone involved knows isn't real, but the audience really wants to believe, even if for a moment, that it is real. To accomplish this, the magician and writers have to use a variety of techniques and skills to fool the audience and make it all seem real. And like in magic, when you're writing, the best tools are the ones the audience never notices. One of those tools in writing is the magic equivalent of sleight of hand, commonly called verisimilitude. It's defined as consistency, or think of it as the story being true to itself. When it comes to speculative fiction, this is even more important. Let's think about your own life for a minute. Have you ever visited another city, state, or country? What's probably the first thing you notice? All these people are weird. Why? Because their lives and surroundings are different from yours. They have different memes and traditions and languages and more things that I could probably name. For example, if I asked you what type of drink this is, some of you might say Coke, some might call it soda, others call it pop, or maybe even some things I can't pronounce. Likewise, Sam and Dean are hunters. They have different lives, different experience. If any one of us saw a family member on the side of the road by a car, nobody here is going to jump out and scream, "Did you make a deal?" But Dean did. And he would too. Because of the lives and things we've seen these boys go through, that assumption by Dean would be to imagine anyone else saying it, but it's perfect coming from him. Likewise, Jack's moment in heaven. It would be easy, maybe even expected, for the showrunners to have that moment be one we'd previously seen in an earlier episode. On a theoretical level, these characters do things when they're off screen, which we, the audience, don't see. But when you think about it, we also know that they really don't, because the characters are fake. They are ordinary. On the literal level, these guys only act when we see them. My theory is that this tension in our minds between these two contradictory features of stories is the root of the suspension of disbelief. Therefore, the measure of a good storyteller is one who can best soothe this tension in the audience. A bad storyteller makes you more aware of these contradictions. Ironically, the longer a story goes on, the more difficult this task can become, but setting aside discussions that could take up hours, in this moment tells us, the audience, and enforces the idea that here is something that happened off screen. We didn't see it before because we didn't need to, but we're seeing it now. See, two examples of a little touch, a single line, a very brief scene. Add them all up together, they take up a tiny fraction of this episode's runtime. Yet, it's needed to make these characters in this world seem different, but very real. I like that Lily Sunder returned. I thought it was pulled off well enough and believable that the boys wouldn't have thought of her sooner, since that episode was kind of a minor case. And Cal, if he had thought of her, I could see why maybe he wouldn't want to contact her. And she generally did a good job this episode. I was a little put off by Dean's hostility toward her. I don't recall him being that way in her previous episode, but I may need to go back and rewatch it. This time he seemed kind of mad that she tried to kill angels when we've seen in the past that he doesn't like them and has killed a few himself. Was it because she tried to kill Castiel? In the end, she decided not to. And he tried to kill him also in Season 10. I know it's kind of tradition that when one of the brothers is gruff and abrasive, it's Dean, but this is another time I felt like he and Sam should have been swapped, with Sam being the questioning one, given his whole experience being soulless. Anubis... yeah, you'll be Anubis. I thought everything around him, the performance, the explanation, that was all pretty well done. There is some discussion about his role and the abacus, which was a nice effect, by the way, and the afterlife in general, but that's theology and philosophy. This video is going to be too long as it is. So, I guess now it's time to talk about the Big Empty, or as I'm going to call him, Mr. Goo. And yes, I do find him rather similar. Actually, I wonder how one would tell the difference between it, Leviathans, and Amara. Decent effects with it, but this all feels a bit cliche now. I do think visual-wise, they maybe should have tried something different, something new with it. Now, going back to what I said earlier with verisimilitude, I did really like that the actress playing Mr. Goo acted very off. One could say it was a bad acting job, but she's supposed to be representing an eldritch being. Such a thing would not act normally, or how we would expect. So I thought the performance was fitting, given the nature of the character. But what about the canon around it? The idea that this entity, the Keeper, Mr. Goo, can just up and leave the big empty and invade heaven it's right on that line. Let's first think on the character level. It's stated in this episode that Mr. Goo wants Jack. But in the show, we have seen a Nephilim die before. And there's implications that there were others who died in the past. So how did things go back then? Did heaven or the empty get them? Was there never a debate before? Now this gets into something I've seen discussed around the web before. The question of when we can believe what characters tell us in stories like Supernatural. The natural tendency is for the audience to believe what they are told. So when something goes against what a character said, forums seem to devolve into a debate over that character's motives for lying. But there is another possibility. The character might have just been wrong, but didn't know it. So in this instance, did Mr. Goo really want Jack because he's part angel? Or did the angels assume something incorrectly? In the previous episode, we saw the essence of Lucifer awaken in the big empty. Did that have something to do with this? Is a deal involved? Or was all this just Goo taking an opportunity to get back at Castiel for his earlier trolling? Right about now, almost any of these are a possibility, and would fit with everything we saw and heard in this episode. Now, as far as story logic goes, it's tough. The biggest problem is that with the show establishing a being in charge of that place, death starts to lose its meaning again. At least earlier in season 13, they established the fact that it was an exceptional being and exceptional circumstances that got Castiel back. If he died again, they might not have all those factors going for them. But now with Lucifer possibly reviving and Mr. Goo going back and forth from this realm, it establishes an impression on the audience that death, again, doesn't have the impact in this universe that it should. Because, let's be real for a moment. If the showrunners were smart, then they would let this ticking clock hang over Castiel's head until the show's very end, and then touch of a bittersweet finale they know the show should go out on. But they probably won't. At some point, probably later this season, someone is going to want some easy drama, and will have the bill come due, and bam, Castiel will die. But we know he won't stay dead. They'll find yet another way to bring him back to life. Probably by making yet another deal, or finding a yet more powerful entity than Mr. Goo, or by killing it in a manner which strains disbelief. And the fact that we're all probably instinctively assuming this because it's a habit for the show drains much of the key tension and drama out of this episode. Still, all that aside, most of this episode was positive, and it wins a lot of bonus points for me for fixing one of Carver's worst mistakes. So a hearty 4 out of 5 shells for Byzantium. You earned every one of these. Until next time, feel free to